you've been asked. Perhaps it's a little bit of challenging question where you didn't quite know what to answer. Or maybe it's a fairly standard one that, you know, you've had in every interview you've ever been in. Please just pop it into the Slido, or if you can't cope with Slido, feel free to pop it into the chat. Because what we'd like to do is put some of those questions together and create a little bit of a resource for you guys when you want to practice for academic interviews later on. So look, welcome everybody. My name is Professor Sharon Parker. As most of you know, I'll be hosting our discussion today, and I am going to now start to kick off with our session today. We are talking about strategies for successful academic interviews. Obviously a very important topic. Most of the time those interviews are for a position. Sometimes they can be for a particular role, or they can be for a promotion. But what is it that helps? And some of us on the call today will be people who've done a lot of these interviews, as in run a lot of these interviews, and some of us will be people who've experienced them, and others will be knowing that that is something down the track as a PhD student that you will have to do. So it's a great topic. As usual, we'd love to see your face if you feel comfortable sharing. If you're stuck on anything, just message our support team in the chat. And as usual, I just encourage you to be self-indulgent and actually just listen to the talk and think and reflect a little bit about your own journey. We today here in Perth, Western Australia, are on the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and do feel free to share on the chat which land you are on today. As usual, our standard format, I'm going to start with a little bit of the evidence on this topic, a little bit of the research, and then we're really delighted to have two fantastic AIC Laureate Fellow, Anne Castles and Sarah Bakessi, and I should have checked how to say your name properly, Sarah, apologies. But we will have those laureates joining us a little bit later. And we have a new question asker today who I'll introduce a bit later as well. So I'm going to begin actually with a model of work performance, because of course when you go into, and this is one that I and colleagues developed actually a long time ago, but believe it or not, we still use it because it is still super relevant to today's work. I use an academic model of, a model of work performance to sort of frame the discussion, because in the end, that's what an interview is really about. It's about your past work performance, and it's about people making guesses really about what your future work performance will be if they are recruiting you into their faculty or their department. So what this model says is that, you know, traditional sort of, I guess, performance models focus on this sort of individual mastery box down the bottom. In other words, these are the things that you do as an individual that you know need to be done to perform the job well. So they're the predictable aspects of the work. And in an academic setting, of course, that is the research and the teaching components of the research that you as an individual need to perform well at and convey your future performance about to the academic panel. So that's the bottom hand left-hand corner. But what we know is that individuals are embedded within these interdependent systems, right? So individuals will be part of a team, might be a research team, might be a department, and in turn part of a faculty, part of a university, and, you know, even part of broader professional communities, academic communities, and so on. So there's interdependence. So when we think about performance, we need to think about that interdependence. The other dimension there is uncertainty. And what that recognises is that there are some known predictable parts of a job, but what we also know is that the best performers are also able to adapt to new things, new requirements in the job. And an example might be, increasingly in academia, people are expected to have impact. So not just do great research and be great teachers, but also have impact. So that would be an example of how the environment changes, and that changes the expectations for the role. And then, so adaptivity is about your ability, your skills to cope with change. And then proactivity is really your adaptivity, is your, skills and abilities to drive change, to be proactive, to use your initiative, to be creative. So this is the model that I will use to unpack some thoughts. So as I say, the core, really, the things we know that you need to be great at if you want to be successful in an interview are research and teaching. So let's have a little look at those. And first of all, there are meta-analyses that would be sort of shocking if this was not true, but it is true, that if people display that they are really good at those core behaviours, in this case, research and teaching, they do tend to be more likely to successfully get the job. I think one of the most important things, I think this message will come out from all of us, is the importance of preparing, doing your homework. So even though you might be applying for a research and teaching position, you are applying for it in a particular department, it is really, really important to go into the interview knowing about that department, and then to sort of connect your story, your journey with that department. So I always recommend, it's a bit like, a politician has answers to a question. So they have things they want to say, and no matter what they get asked, right, they say those things. In a way, with a job interview, of course, you want to answer the question, but I encourage people to prepare, not just by thinking this question, here's what I'll say, think about your whole story. What was it that drove you into academia? What is it that sustained you? What is it that you love about it that keeps you here? Where are you going? What's your trajectory? But I think of it more like a story. And if you've got that really clear in your mind, in a sense, you then get those opportunities to share that story in your journey. And the importance of practice, I think, is obvious. I know that we're going to come to some of the tips around how do you show that you're really good at research and teaching. So I'll probably just leave that. One thing I would want to say is the research shows, and you'll hear more examples from our panelists later, that how you answer the question is just as important as what you say. So being fairly specific, keeping it focused on the topic, using examples, not speaking too long. This is probably one of the trickiest things, is knowing when to stop your answer. I have probably observed many more people going on far too long than people being too short. So most people have to pull back, I think, and not be quite so long. And of course, conveying that you're enthusiastic and excited to be being interviewed is super important. I just want to share, there is a meta-analysis around non-verbal communication in interviews. And so this is a meta-analysis, is an analysis of other studies. So this is an analysis of 63 studies that have looked at what are the non-verbal aspects in interviews that predict your likelihood of getting the job. I'm going to share a couple more with you in a minute, but one of the strongest predictor, can you believe it? The strongest non-verbal predictor is dressing professionally. So now, and what's sort of sad? Well, I don't know if it's sad or not, but you need to know that that figure is even higher for women. In other words, it's even more important for women that they dress professionally. Now, I'm not condoning whether that's a good or bad thing. That I'm just telling you what the research says. In other words, if you were a female going for a job and you didn't dress professionally, you are more likely to be punished than a man who doesn't dress professionally. We talk a lot in Women in Research about some of the unfairness in the world, and this is one of those things. So research and teaching is really the core. And you really need to have your strong story around your research and teaching and what you've done and what you want to do in the future and so on. But I just want to expand out a little bit to the model. And so I mentioned before that, you know, increasingly, I would argue, academics can't just be that solo academic. And this varies a bit by discipline, right? Some, you know, disciplines tend to be more solo authored and this type of stuff. Other disciplines are always got strong emphasis on research teams. So it varies a little bit by discipline, but the reality is any job you go for, you're always going to be part of a bigger entity. And so a really, really important part of an academic interview is that the panel will be making judgments about you as a colleague, as a citizen, as a contributor to the team and the organisation. So this is a really, really important part. And I think, again, if we look at the meta-analysis, if we look at the evidence, be showing things that demonstrate that you're a good team member, predict success in interviews. So never underestimate the power of that. Have your examples, those specific examples. You know, I've seen people come into interviews who do not know who else is in the department. I mean, you should never do an academic interview without knowing who is in the department. Who are they? What research do they do? How might you complement? How might your work complement them? If you can demonstrate in the interview, it shows that you're going to be. It sort of helps show that you're going to be a good citizen, actually, because you've bothered to find out who's there and you care about that. One thing you should never do in an interview is speak negatively about past colleagues. It might be tempting to explain some of your performance because you had bad colleagues in the past. Be very, very, very wary about doing that because people will make judgments about it and they might not be the judgments that you hope that they make. And I think the most important thing, this comes to the other nonverbal aspect, is to show that you are a good citizen through your behaviour in the interview. So what do I mean by that? Well, going back to that meta-analysis on nonverbal aspects that predict likelihood of getting a job in job interviews, eye contact and head movements are actually really important. Why? Well, eye contact sort of shows that you've got some interpersonal skills, I suppose. And I say this in the full knowledge that in some cultures, this could be quite difficult. It might be different. So again, I'm reporting these average findings, but this is what the research shows. So eye contact shows that you are paying attention and you are connecting. You're connecting with the people that are in the room. Head movements, and by that I mean things like if you're being interviewed by a panel member, looking at someone who asks, if they ask you the question, you actually turn your head and you look at them. Maybe you nod as someone is asking a question, but you show that you are paying attention carefully to what they say. And that's really hard, right? Because you're sitting there, you're feeling anxious, you're all wrapped up in what I should say, but actually trying to be a little bit in the moment and really paying attention to what people are saying and who's in the room. Now, that takes practice and skill. So the more that you practice interviews, the better. And the reason practice matters is that you can routinize what you're going to say. So you know what you're going to say, you're comfortable, and then you can spend more attention on how you're saying it, including those nonverbal behaviors. So that's another reason why practice is super important. So demonstrate that you are a good citizen. And I want to share with you an example question. And I'm sorry to my colleagues, I'm giving away one of the questions that we always use and find to be quite a good discriminator. And now I'm telling everyone, so it won't be anymore. We'll have to change our question. We often ask people this question if someone's, say, coming for a postdoc position or a senior lecturer position, if you're successful in this role, what would success look like? And I wish I hadn't revealed both of these at the same time. But if we look at the one on the left, so the person says, okay, in 3 years' time, I'd be successful if I've published 6 or 7 tier 1 articles on my core topic, I've built my academic reputation, I would have gotten at least 2 grants, my head of department would say I'm ready to be promoted to associate professor. Now, what is wrong with that answer? It's showing ambition, it's specific. Well, to me, what is wrong with that answer is it's all about me, 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 me. So I'm going to judge my success purely on what I've done. I think a better answer, and by the way, we'll talk more about this later. It's a bit of a tightrope to walk, as we've discussed in other Women in Research sessions. But I think you want to convey what you will have done. So you don't want to lose that, but you also want to connect into the department or the goals of the department. So you might say, and this is not the perfect answer, but you might say something like, I'd have published 6 or 7 tier 1 journal articles, which would have helped the department to be well rated in the blah, blah ratings. And I would have led 1 grant and contributed to, or led 1 or 2 led by others in the department. And we'd have jointly mentored some PhD students to completion. Now, I'm not saying that's the ideal answer, but I hope you can see the difference in those 2 answers. I hope that that one on the right is conveying equally the aspiration and the ambition, but also that collegiality, that connection into the interdependent components. And then the last little chunk I'm going to talk about here is these aspects of performance that go beyond what's predictable, you know, so being able to be agile, to adapt to change, being more proactive, like someone who makes things happen, who initiates things, who sets things up, who's innovative. And I would often see those as quite tangled up with leadership. Now, the point is, these sorts of behaviours are going to be more important for more senior positions, right? You know, these might not be so important. I still think they probably are a little bit important for lecturing sorts of level, but the higher up you go in your interviews, the more you need to be able to speak to these sorts of behaviours, and the higher up in terms of level. So as a lecturer, you might be talking about your innovation with respect to your research, sort of a bit more individual. But if you're going for a professorship, you're probably going to be talking more about innovation or proactivity at that organisation, or at least the faculty or the school level of things that you've done and ways that you've contributed from that perspective. So I think, as I say here, these sorts of behaviours are especially important for more senior positions. You might get a question about, tell us a time when things changed, how did you cope? You might get a question about, give us an example of something that you've initiated or led. So especially leadership roles, these sorts of questions and behaviours become even more important. So if you're going for a leadership role, just to throw in here, I make a very strong distinction between management and leadership. Management sort of is assuming a formal position and doing what you need to do in that role. Leadership is really much more about influence. You can be a leader at any level. It's much more about influence. It's about getting people to go beyond where they might have gone otherwise. And so, I think you might even as a lecturer be wanting to convey your leadership potential. And that doesn't mean sitting on committees or assuming formal positions of authority. It's about influencing, it's about shaping the agenda and contributing in those sorts of ways. So just keep that in mind, that even for lower level positions, again, this might be part of your story around how you've made those broader contributions. We will always share the slides with you later. As you know, there are some resources there that there are links to that I found, and probably honestly you can Google them just as quickly as me, but there's some good ones there. So that's all I want to say. So I'm really just taking you back to this idea of an academic interview is about assessing your performance, past and future. And so thinking, what does performance mean in an academic sense? And encouraging you to recognize, yes, it's about the core, teaching and research, but it's also about you're part of an independent entity. So the collegiality is important. And also increasingly, especially as you get more senior, performance is not just about doing what's known and predictable, but it's about going beyond those things. So that's it from me today, guys. And I'm super happy to introduce our two panelists. First, we have Professor Sarah Beckersey. And Sarah, you better tell me if I'm really butchering your name there. Sorry.
Not at all.
Is that how
perfect.
you say it?
Yeah, that's great.
And it's great to have you here, Sarah. Sarah has been in the Women in Research series before. And she's at the University of Melbourne and does amazing, complex biodiversity conservation work. And then we will go from her to Professor Anne Castles, who's also an ARC Laureate Fellow from ACU, the Australian Catholic University. And her research is, I guess, a bit more on the social end, humanities. I'm not sure if you categorize yourself as humanities, Anne, or whether it's a little bit more on that social science, but focusing on topics like learning, how to help people learn to read, and dyslexia. So it's great that we've got different people with different perspectives. And I will stop sharing, and I am very delighted to pass you, first of all, to ARC Industry Laureate Fellow, Sarah Beckersey.
Thank
Over
you so
to you,
much.
Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for your presentation, and also for the invitation to be here. It's a real privilege. I love this forum, and I really hope it can go on and on, Sharon, despite your your laureate finishing, because we all appreciate it so much. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm in the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people and pay my deepest respects to elders past and present, and also just to acknowledge that I'm sitting in a hospital at the moment because my dad, who's 88 and actually thinks he's 18 still, fell off a wall. Oh. And he broke 5 ribs and punctured a lung. So I'm really sorry if there are noises in the background, but I hope you all understand. But I was really keen to give this talk today because I hopefully have got some really useful recent experience that I can share with you from both sides of the interview table. So, you know, throughout my career, I've interviewed I've interviewed people for a lot of different academic jobs, both kind of research, teaching, and also professional roles. Recently, I've actually had the privilege in roles outside of my academic life. I'm on the board of Bush Heritage Australia and also the Biodiversity Council, and we've appointed recently 2 CEOs, so I can talk about how people performed in those interviews. And then I myself last year decided I wanted a change of scene, and I went for 2 different jobs, and I actually got them both. One was overseas and one was in Australia at the University of Melbourne. So hopefully I've got some good stuff to share with you. I think the first point I want to make is that basically everything in the interview process is should be about telling a story about why you are perfect for the role. Every single question, no matter what it is, it could be, do you have questions for us? And I'll come back to that. But that is actually a really key question for you to show that you understand what the future is for that organisation, and that you might have a question that actually really probes to their kind of perspective on it, for example. A lot of academic roles, certainly the 2 that I just went for, had basically 2-day kind of, and it was like 2-day extravaganzas. We had to go for lunches and dinners and give talks and speak to PhD students. And every single moment of that, as stressful as it is actually part of the interview. And I would even say that I agree with Sharon, even when you walk into the room and make that first impression, and that is part of your interview, or exit the room. If you can walk in and make eye contact, say hello to everyone, ideally shake hands if that's okay for you to do so. And also when you leave the room. So the Biodiversity Council role that we recently just hired for, someone left without really saying goodbye. And actually that was commented on, that, what's their kind of emotional intelligence, essentially, that you can read from that particular moment. I think the preparing idea, probably Anne, Sharon and I are all going to say this, but I really can't emphasize it enough. You really do have to spend a lot of time preparing for interviews. You can't just wing it. And the first thing to prepare is actually researching your organisation, as Sharon said, and it may not be that you feel that you're absolutely perfect for the role even, but that doesn't necessarily matter, because in academia, and like, for example, the first job I had was working in a planning school, and I came from biodiversity conservation. But I saw that it could be an opportunity for me to actually, really sort of engage with a really different part of my research. And it ended up being that I worked a lot in cities, and actually that's totally shaped my academic career. So, really think about what it is that you want to contribute, and what do they need. I mean, the Bush Heritage person who got the current CEO, at the end of her, no, actually at the start of her interview. So this is one thing, this is a really good thing to prepare, is a sort of 5 to 10 minute, it could be more depending on the role, answer to what will almost certainly be the first question, which is why are you right for the position? That is almost always going to be asked. And don't just sort of say, oh, look, it's just, I'm fabulous and I'll be great. You need to have almost like a 10-minute spiel prepared, where you go through why your prior experiences makes you perfect for the role, what you plan to do in the role, what your strategy is. Everything important that you want to say in your interview should be captured in that very first question. So prepare that, practice it, make sure that it's not too long, but it's long enough to really look convincing. One person who came into a current interview that we had, she didn't get the job, mind you, but it was really fantastic. She had a piece of paper that she'd written that basically summarized that spiel. So you can't prepare too much for that first answer, and really think carefully about it. Definitely prepare questions for the panel, and they can be quite I think as I was about to say, the CEO for Bush Heritage prepared something around the budget and what were our aims and strategies, and actually asking a question that made us as interviewers think, gosh, what is our strategy? It was like, it was actually, you could see instantly that she was going to be a great person to have, because she'd already identified where our weaknesses and could take us, could show that she could actually take us in the right direction. I'm not saying that you have to do that for every single job, but I'm giving you really top class examples that you can perhaps learn from in your own preparation. And then I think the other question that you always get asked is something around strengths and weaknesses. Or, we actually asked people recently, this job has so many different aspects to it. You've got to be this, that, and the other. And research and teaching there are always so many elements. We asked, what's the aspect that you're least qualified for, and how will you deal with it? So they might be asking you. So in that kind of answer, it's really good to be honest, to say, listen, I've had, my least bit of experience would be in working with First Nations peoples, for example. But my strategy is, in the first, 3 months of the job, I'm going to be doing lots of training, that's available to me, go on a listening exercise, think really carefully and creatively about how you would tackle that sort of perceived weakness, if it is one in your CV or your experience. If there's an option, actually, this is something I've really learned lately, is that if there's an option to contact the person, this is more in the shortlisting phase, contact the person for more information, absolutely do it. Because that is kind of almost like industry norm now. And it's kind of annoying if you're running a panel, if you're running a recruitment process, but you'd be crazy not to, and see if you can arrange a catch up. And that catch up is actually part of the interview. So don't just sort of say, listen, what would I earn, and when could I start, and you know, that sort of thing. You're performing already in that kind of initial discussion with the person who's running the recruitment process. So prepare the same as you would for an interview, with answers that they might ask you, as well as questions for them. I think the other thing I wanted to touch on is being authentic. And I mentioned to Sharon that, a really interesting aspect of this current recruitment process that we ran was how many of the applications were obviously written using AI, because they were kind of the same, the cover letters and the responses to selection criteria. And it was really off-putting. And it was actually quite an easy way for us to flick them into the do not interview pile. So, whilst it's tempting and sometimes can be useful, I would really make sure that your application stands out. And the same can be said for researching how you're going to respond to interview questions. Don't just use AI, because they'll probably know it. Because it's sort of, and it's actually really important for your own kind of personality and your authenticity to come out in an interview, and that's why they want to get to know you. I think the thing is that I would say, though, is, and I think Sharon also mentioned this, is to avoid red flags. The psychology of the situation is they're sitting there, they want you to be great. They really want to appoint someone, and they want it to be you. And so they don't want you to say things that are going to be like, oh, I wish she hadn't said that, or I wish that this wasn't the case. You don't need to say everything in an interview, and it's not being dishonest. It's actually just framing your situation. And it might be that you had a completely legitimate disagreement with your previous boss, and that's why you left. Or it might be that there are certain things that have happened that have meant that you haven't been able to, achieve the ideal level of something. But you don't have to say that in the interview. You just avoid saying anything that's going to be perceived as a red flag, including when you talk about your weaknesses. Don't just say, oh, sometimes I can't get out of bed in the morning. I mean, even if that's the case, find a way of saying something that can also be painted as a positive. Some people say that, being a perfectionist, for example. I mean, you don't want to say that, because I think everyone says that. But find a weakness is actually that you can flip into a positive, or how you're going to tackle that weakness might be the positive.
Sarah, I'll just ask you to make one more point, just
yes,
in terms of time. Yeah, terrific.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I suppose my last one really is that it's okay to be self-confident. And maybe we can come back to that in the question time, Sharon, but I think, a lot of women are not as confident as they could be in interviews. And certainly there's a fine line between being sort of arrogant, I suppose, and confident. I'll give an example. In a recent interview that I had, I was asked, how will I become famous? Which is a horrible interview question in front of 10 professors. And apparently I was the only candidate who said, I'm already famous. So I didn't say that. All the other candidates did, and I got the job. So there's something about being humble as well as being self-confident. You don't want to sort of say things that really aren't true, I suppose. And I think that I certainly appreciate having humble people in the workplace. So
thank you,
okay,
Sarah.
I'm going to leave it there.
Perfect way to end. And I think, I mentioned before, and we've talked about it in other women in research sessions, it is a bit of a tension women have to juggle that men do not necessarily have to juggle, which is about getting that self-confidence, humility sort of thing right. And it's tricky, but thank you for raising it. And I think we'll probably come back to that in the questions. So thank you. Wonderful. Lots of great feedback. But now I'm delighted to introduce our second panelist, ARC Laureate Fellow Anne Castles. Over to you, Anne.
Hi, everybody, and it's a real pleasure to be here. amongst what is an absolutely enormous group. It's amazing to me. I have got some slides, so I'll ask Elena to share the screen and I'll just go through the slides. It's hard being the third speaker because there is a lot of what I'm going to say has already been said by Sharon and by Sarah, but hopefully I'll add a few extra little tidbits along the way that will help to reinforce some of those points. Just a couple of caveats first up. I am focusing on the research side of interviews. Obviously, for academic interviews, there will also often be questions about administrative things or managerial things, as Sharon mentioned. I'm not going to talk about those. I'm going to focus on the questions that are about your research and your research-led teaching. And also, I mean, I saw in the questions that people were asking things about promotion interviews. And as Sharon's already mentioned, they're somewhat different than job interviews where you're going to a new place. And for the moment, what I'm focusing more on is the job interview, which I think is the thing that we sort of think about most in terms of academic interviews, but certainly we can talk about promotion interviews in the chat if there are questions around that. We can go forward, Elena. There. So I've gone with a kind of a listicle approach, my top 5 tips for performing at an academic interview. I have been on both sides of the interview process, and so the tips I have kind of come from both of those. And the first thing that came to my mind, which has kind of been mentioned, but perhaps not quite in the same way, is the most important thing is that you convey your unique research identity. What is it that defines you? I mean, you know, if it's me, as Sharon said, it's like immediately people could say, oh, she's the reading and dyslexia girl, you know, and she wants to understand how children learn to read and why they sometimes struggle. You know, I guess it's a little bit like an elevator pitch, but you want the panel, when they get to the end of all the interviews and they've got this big pile of CVs sitting there, you want them to be able to sum up in a couple of words what it is that you do. What is your research about? And I've certainly seen, and it surprised me at first when I was on interview panels, that, you know, you'd have some applicants who had huge long lists of publications, but they would be passed over in favour of someone with a shorter list of publications, but where there was a more clear, unique identity to that research. And so, you know, being able to say exactly who and what you are and what you do and convey that really clearly to the panel. We can go forward, Elena, to the next slide. Now, this has been touched on, so I won't go on about it too much, but it's so essential, and that is conveying your narrative. And look, let's be honest, some of this is often retrofitted. You might not always know what your narrative is when you start, but you need to be able to convey and hopefully get it into the questions. What are the questions you've asked through your career and where have they led you? What made you interested in what you do in the first place? And then where did that take you? And often there'll be sort of zeitgeist things. You know, in my case, I ended up doing quite early on a whole lot of research in visual deficits in dyslexia, because that was kind of a big thing at the time. But actually, as it turned out, there wasn't very much to it. And so it led me to go into ask other questions and go into different directions in terms of understanding dyslexia. But, and most important of all, where do you want to go from here? And that's obviously been touched on by both Sharon and Sarah. And the most important thing is to be specific. So not just I'm going to keep doing my research on dyslexia, but I I plan to apply for a discovery project in the next 2 years. I want to look at this question because my previous research has led me to this question. I want to write these papers. I want to collaborate with people in the department on this and on this, so that you're very clearly setting out both past, present, and future in how your research journey it has followed. Next slide.
And I don't want you to run out of time, so you've got about 3 minutes left, so 1 minute per point. If you
okay, then.
That. Thank you.
All right, no worries. There's a really third point is show, don't tell. I think there's a real difficult sort of conflict here that's come up a little bit already, that you want to show how good you are, but also not be braggy. And I saw in the questions, how do I stop using I statements? Well, I think you can't stop using I statements. You're talking about yourself. But that doesn't mean that you go into sort of chest beating, I am the best reading researcher in the world sort of thing. Again, you be factual and specific and show people why you're the best person for the job, rather than telling them that you're the best person. Next slide. This has been covered as well. You've got to be able to talk about the links that you're going to make. It's not just about you. And here we're thinking about both external and internal links. So it's already been discussed to do your homework for the internal side of things. Who's in the department or the centre? Who are you going to be able to collaborate with? What are you, what are they going to bring to you? Not just what you are going to bring to them, but also the external side. What are you going to bring from your external collaborations in to this new organisation or new place? So what collaborations have you already got? Maybe you're going to bring some PhD students with you. So you're showing how you're going to be able to build the centre and department and grow it, not just be a single person that comes along and does some things. And my final slide. This has been touched on, but I think it's super, super important. Generate excitement. It makes such a difference when you're on the panel where you see that the applicant has enthusiasm about their plans and they really want to say why this is the best place to do their work and why they can't wait to start. And I can remember an example where in a previous job that I was in, but we had 100 applicants for one position. And 70 of them we sort of could get rid of just based on CV and other things. But we interviewed I think 12 to 15 people, and the one that got the job was the one who at the end of the interview we were just all smiling because he was so enthusiastic and he was so excited to join us and was so sort of sure that this was the best place in the world to do the research he wanted to do, that we just couldn't not give him the job. And so I'll stop there, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I love many great points there. I think that point about bringing what you bring in externally into the department, it's also a really important one, isn't it? Is those connections and things that you bring. So I love that you reminded people about that. And now I am super excited to introduce our new question asker, which is Georgia Humphreys. So welcome, Georgia. She is a PhD student here at the Future Work Institute, actually working on the topic of AI and recruitment. So she's sort of probably knows more about that topic than we do. But I'm going to invite you, Georgia, to unmute yourself. Great, we can see you. And kick us off with some questions.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. I'll start by sharing the Slido. I think a lot of the questions that we actually had came through the Slido activity as well, which was really interesting. So hopefully everyone can see that.
Good.
A couple of the key things that came up across both the Slido and our previous questions. One was around your unique value that you can contribute to a team. So I think, Anne, you touched on this briefly around your research value, but I wondered, Sarah, whether you might be comfortable to speak to what unique value people can bring to a team, and if they're asked this in an interview, how they can maybe prepare for that.
Gosh, that is a good question. So the unique value that you would contribute to a team. So, I mean, I think again, like it's a bit like the politician approach that Sharon talked about. Make sure that you have your 5 things that you really want to say about why you are perfect for this role. And so this is yet another time that you can kind of come back to those things. And so, you don't have to, I don't think you have to really focus in on exactly what the question is every single time, I would say. So I could interpret that as, why are you right for the job type thing. And I think if you could frame it as, my background my interdisciplinary background is really unique. And that is why and so you're talking maybe interdisciplinarity is one of the things that you wanted to focus on. Or I suppose the other kind of thing that you could do is turn something that people might see as being maybe a sort of weakness, if I can call it that. Say you've had a career break and you've had children, for example. You could talk about the fact that you're kind of unique in that you've developed this approach of being super efficient in your work and really honing in on prioritizing activities, because that's what parenting kind of actually forces you to do, and so it is a unique skill and a value. So you could use that kind of question to highlight those sorts of things as well, but I would keep coming back to why you were right for the job. Every question is really about that.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially in terms of what you're talking about before around bringing it back to that core value proposition throughout all the questions. I think it's a good example of how to really make sure you can wrap it all up together. And maybe a question for you. I can see another popular question in here was about what your vision is for the next 5 years. I know you touched on this in your point 2, but anything else you'd like to add on how people can prepare or answer this one?
Yeah, look, I think again, it does just come down to being as specific as possible, but also bringing in making sure you've done your homework in terms of who the other people are in the department, so that you can see new directions that you could go in. So I think you want that, I want to do this in 2 years and then this in 3 years, but then you also want to have a little bit of room to move there, right? I found a lot of collaborations happen through the fact that you're next door offices to someone, and so you end up getting talking and you end up discovering that you have really interesting questions that you'd like to address. So I think maybe having a very specific idea, but also making clear that you're open to the opportunities that might come your way by joining this particular organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Anne. That was a really, really popular one we had, so I'm sure that was really helpful.
Can I just jump in there as well, if you don't mind, Georgia? And I think it also comes back to points both Anne and Sarah have made about sort of what's your story, because it is a great opportunity to convey what's important to you and perhaps potentially some of those behaviours in those outside boxes, that you are collegial, and that your vision might be around building a research team and engaging in mentorship. It depends what career level you are, of course, but equally that you might that you might be proactive, and that might be part of your story, and it might be that you'd really like to set up a centre or whatever, again appropriate to the level. But I think it's again that your vision is an opportunity, as you so beautifully said, Anne, to tell your story, to craft your narrative. So I think, yes, again, sort of say what you want to say, even if it's not quite a perfect fit to the question.
A similar question to that, which was quite a common one we had in our Q&A. Sarah, I might ask this one to you. You talked about a couple of really common interview questions that come up in academic interviews that we can expect no matter what. Another one that we often get is tell us about yourself, just broadly, very vague. Do you have any tips for how we can prepare or respond to this question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are probably three things I would suggest. One would be this is your chance to really be authentic and a bit personal and actually, tell things that might be slightly unique about you, that you've performed in the theatre, or you're really into sport. But do remember to keep bringing that, remember to keep bringing that into why you're also perfect for the role. So even that is actually an opportunity for you to articulate, that my performance, in theatre has actually given me a really sort of confident approach to speaking in front of students, for example, that sort of thing. So being authentic and personal, this is your opportunity to do that. I think do make sure though that you do keep coming back to what your characteristics are that make you great for the role again, and no red flags. So again, tell a bit about yourself. Just you don't have to tell anything that could potentially be framed by someone on the panel as a red flag. So don't sort of reveal anything about your health, for example, or anything like that, or conflicts that you've had, or negative things that might have shaped who you are, even if they're really important to your identity. We've all got them. You don't have to talk about it in an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. And you'll notice I've stopped sharing. Please feel free to keep putting your questions through. As Sharon said, we'll share them on the website later, so feel free to keep putting those through. But while you're doing that, and you spoke briefly about kind of specificity and how to structure your responses and giving examples. One of our questions was around whether the STAR method is still used or whether it's outdated. Do you have any suggestions on how to structure your answers?
I must admit, when this came up before the session started, and I actually didn't know the STAR the STAR method. It must have got invented after I did my interviews. Look, I think the STAR method, now that I know what it is, captures many of the things that we've talked about. But by the same token, you don't want things to be too formulaic. It's a bit like what Sarah was just talking about in terms of showing a little bit of yourself. I think you want your answers to help to be specific and be clear and all of those sorts of things, but also to convey a little bit about you as a person. And so I think from that point of view, sticking to something that's really rigorous it can maybe take away a little bit from people's feeling of warmth towards you. And the fact is, panels do get feelings of warmth towards particular individuals just based on the way they talk, the way they look, all the things that Sharon mentioned at the outset.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess moving from the specifics of how we can prepare and respond to questions, there's been a number of questions around the unique challenges that women may face specifically in the context of academic interviews. Does anyone, I might put it to everyone, but maybe Sarah, we can start with you. Do you have any thoughts on what those unique challenges might be, or how we can kind of prepare and overcome some of these things?
I mean, I think Sharon probably talked to some of them. You don't meet many women who don't have the sort of instant sort of feeling of imposter syndrome in situations. So I think sort of trying to get over that and back yourself and actually being sort of as confident as you possibly can be. I think men are really great about that. I mean, the fact that every other man who was interviewed by this panel said that I'm already famous. I mean, what? They don't have a problem with that. That's what you're up against. So I think sometimes being humble can be a sort of advantage, but I think a lot of the time you really do have to just exude confidence and try and practice. I think we've all said this, but it's so true. I often interview people and I think, you have not practiced this question. And it's so obvious and clear. So, get your friends to practice those classic questions with you and have really nice responses, and then get them to throw you some curveballs and see how you go. Yeah, I think probably that would be the main one, is confidence. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you've
if I
got it.
I can jump in too. I actually wanted to share this story when I was doing my slides and I forgot. And I was reminded by it because I was talking to my 20-year-old daughter who's doing a university degree, and she was working in a team with boys in engineering, and has not been very impressed with their bias. She's sort of experiencing, I think, for the first time. But she told me how that the tutor came up to her and said, "How are you going?" And my daughter said, "Oh, yeah, I'm struggling a bit with blah blah." And and then she ended up getting 30% score for the teamwork, and the boys got 80% right. And I said to her, "Oh my God, what you've reminded me of, I once saw this person doing research on men and women and their behavior in interviews, right? And I have to say, they played a video of a woman and they played a video of a man. Now, this is not everybody, but on average. So the woman, tell us about your achievements. Sort of immediately went to, oh, well, I've achieved some things. I've learnt so much, and collaborative, and I made a few mistakes, but I'm building on that. And when I saw that woman, I thought that's exactly how I would perform in an interview. I'm demonstrating openness, humility, learning focus, Then they show the man, and the man is like, I've done this and I've achieved this, and it was just shocking to me. It was like, oh my God, I'm shocked. I did not know anyone would behave like that in an interview. I'm not saying, and this is the tightrope that we walk, I'm not saying we should necessarily walk in and go, I've done this and I've done that. But like the advice I gave to my daughter was, don't start with the struggles. Start with what's going well and what you're working on. And then you might raise that at the end. And I think it's the same with these interviews. We need to get that right balance of being self-confident, of owning our achievements, of being comfortable using the word I. I mean, I still feel uncomfortable using the word I in those contexts, but combined with that collegiality and humility. And it's not fair that men don't have to think about this on average, but it is the reality. So I think this is a super important issue for women, is, our great strengths, which I believe they are strengths, learning, humility, but they don't always come across as strengths in an interview. So think about and carefully prepare how you can convey that you are a leader and you own things and you drive things and you've got achievements, but you're also someone who will take people with them, and those sorts of other absolutely critical things. But Anne, you're nodding. What do you think to this one?
Oh, no, I haven't got anything further to add on that. I was just agreeing with you. I think it's an incredibly hard balance. As I was, I guess, trying to say in my presentation, I don't think the answer is to necessarily be like men.
No.
And I think what we want to find is a way of conveying, as you said, conveying that confidence without it being a very, chest beating sort of exercise. And I think there are ways of doing that with lots of practice, and women can actually do it really well.
Because the irony, and this is part of what we've talked about in other sessions, the irony is if we behaved like men, we'd get punished anyway.
Yes.
We'd be considered arrogant, aggressive bitches. Sorry to swear for audience out there, but do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's that tightrope that we have to try to work. So
I
love the
prima donna. That's what I've been called in the
prima donna.
past.
Okay, so it's tricky, but we are all living proof that we're all managing somehow to do it. I don't know, Georgia, if we have time. What would you have asked us if we had time? Give us a quick one.
So it's on a very similar note, so hopefully a quick answer. There were a couple of questions around how we can manage being asked around career breaks or actually addressing career breaks. So if anyone has any quick tips for how we can kind of respond to that, that would be great as well.
Sarah, jump in.
Spin it as a superpower. It's actually, I'll leave it at that because it is.
I love that. And there was a question also in the chat for people, CRLD people, like, again, same question. I think it's a strength, and it's having the story and making it a strength and being prepared. So look, we are at the end of our session. Thank you so much, Georgia, for your brilliant question asking. Hope to have you again soon. Thank you, of course, to our wonderful panel, Anne and Sarah. Hope to have you back someday. It's been just great, and I've seen so many positive comments as you guys have been talking, so thank you. Thank you to the people behind the scenes, Eleanor, Isabel, and finally, most important, thank you to all of you who've shown up. I saw at one point there were 289 women on the call. It's just fantastic. We are a great community. Our next one is called Making Yourself Competitive in a Global World. So I think this is less about conveying that you're competitive, which is what we've been talking about today, but more about how you get there. So that will be in August. Look forward to you all joining us again. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming on board, and we will stop there. Thank you all.